Well, good morning, everyone. And I will make a public apology that I have messed up the time of this meeting multiple times. So I apologize for those of you who did not make the call because I changed the time so many times. I apologize, but we are finally here, Debbie. It's finally happening. We have gotten you onto the meeting. And so we're really excited today to learn about the great resources that the State Department is now offering in the core content. It's very timely right now as we're getting ready to go into the summer months and people are thinking about curriculum and assessment. We're anticipating those released priority standards that are coming out in April to make sure we're aligned. And I think a lot of people on the call today were just thinking, okay, well, how do we, first, what's the difference between we've got blocks, we've got leaps, we've got benchmarks. So we really wanted to delineate between those things today. And then we'd love to hear just any recommendations you have of how districts might start incorporating those. And I know many people on the call have, so at the end we can maybe have discussion. But I want to welcome you and thank you for your time with us today.
You are welcome, and thank you for asking me. I love to come anytime to this organization. Shauna has done a lot of work for us, along with several of you too. Cheryl, you have as well. And so we always want to honor our folks when they need something. We return the favor. So today we're going to spend some time to talk a little bit about the resources that fall under the MOLEAP name. It is kind of confusing if you go onto the site to see what's available and what's not, and how things, what the intended use, and how we can use them in the classroom, and so I want to help with that today. My name and contact information is at the very top, and you can find me by phone call, by email, by coming to Jeff City, whatever. I'm here to talk shop with any of you. I'm a teacher at heart, and so that's what I like to do. All right, so let's start off with a little bit about what MOLEAP stands for. We were racking our brains when we were trying to figure out what we were going to call these. And this MOLEAP was originated by Drew Lincoln, who's an assistant director for assessment, and he was the one that came up with MOLEAP. So usually I ask folks to join in. What do you think it means? And we get lots of interesting of definitions or what they think it means, but it actually stands for Missouri Learning, Engagement, and Preparation. So MOLEAP. And there's the website there for you. Lots of information on the website for you to, if you want to spend some time after the call, going through and looking to see what resources are available or things that I've suggested that are on the site. So before we get started, I was thinking about how the best way to help educators understand what all of this means. And so we're going to start with something called the MOLEAP assessments. And so we're going to talk a little bit about what that is, and then we'll break into the other parts. And you notice that I didn't really put that as part of the graphic organizer, because I'll tell you why in just a bit. But we're going to start right away with MOLEAP assessments. So first of all, the MOLEAP assessments came about late summer, early fall, when school districts were trying to scurry around to find what students had missed in that 2019-2020 school year. So these are look back assessments that actually, when a student was in grade 5, they would take the grade 4 to kind of look at that learning loss during that time last year. They're really quickly, we wanted to have something quick and fast and some information back for districts. And we knew that they were aligned with the PLDs, and we used data from the vendors. And so all of that is called a look back assessment. Okay, but because we've moved on and it's now 2020, 2021, the MOLEAP assessments are no longer. Okay, we don't call them MOLEAP assessments anymore. Okay, if you go on site on the web page to look, you're going to find just lots of information from last year, right? And we've sort of renamed those same assessments into something called the MOLEAP benchmarks. Okay, so if I was a teacher and I was thinking, I want to know what my students are doing on grade level Missouri Learning Standards. I want to be able to change my instruction if I know that there's a standard my kids are struggling with. Um, well, the answer to that are the MOLEAP benchmarks. So let's talk a little bit what that looks like. So the MOLEAP benchmarks provide indicators of student learning on the assessments, on the expectations in current year. Okay, they're given on grade level. So if you go to the MOLEAP benchmarks and it's grade 8, you're going to give the grade 8. We're no longer looking back to see what students have missed in that year, those months, scurrying months, of those 2 months where we all scurried around. We've moved on and we want to know what's happening right now. Okay. They're optional. They're no cost to districts, no accountability, meaning that if you take it, no one's going to have your scores and hold those scores over your head. They're your scores. They're for instructional purposes, yes, but there's student specific information to guide that instruction. So when you give that assessment, you get that information back. So what am I going to have to do to teach or change my curriculum so that my students are going to meet this current year's expectations? They've all been teacher developed because they're assessment items that mirror what the map and end of course looks like. They have a lot of the same types of questions on there. They're set format wise the same. You're going to recognize them of what it kind of looks like, right? Inside in Nextera, they're scored by the vendor. There are a variety of reports available online. So it's the same kind of thing that you would have if you were doing the practice test electronically, or if you were had a map. So that's what the MOLEAP benchmarks. And the whole word benchmark is to help know where we are at this point of the year so far with our students in this current year expectations. This is kind of what it looks like. Again, I took a snippet of ELA, science, and of math. It looks more like the testing that we would do for a map.
And Debbie, can you clarify what grade levels they're for?
Yes, excellent. Thank you. The MOLEAP benchmarks are for 3 through 8, English 1 and English 2, and then same thing with the end of course for social studies. Science is 5, 8, and then the end of course math is 3 through 8, and all your end of course. So, yeah. Thank you, Shauna. I forgot to mention that. So instruction wise, you're going to think about, using them to help students with those test taking skills, using it to evaluate on grade level material. You could be using this benchmark to look at the item types, for example, the writing prompts for ELA, the listening passages, math performance events, the science tasks. So there's lots of reasons that you would give this to guide instruction, which we talked about it before. As an assessment lens, you can use reports. There's the Lexile and Quantile data that you can pull from this. There's indicators of student learning, the progress on the Missouri Learning Standards. You can actually have students go to that vendor site to practice that whole assessment piece. There are lots of different tools to use the benchmark, but know that they can be and they are vendor scored. They will have to be uploaded by your district test coordinator and all of those processes that you would normally do as a map. Now there are practice forms that are on the web page that you can still download and print out for paper that have the similar types of things. It doesn't give you all the benefits. I'll tell you that the practice forms are kind of old. They're about 3 years now, so you may not have the newer performance events in math. You may not have, some of the newer tasks in science and some of the things, but that is also an opportunity to help you with some of this as well. Okay, so then the other part of this MOLEAP resources are the MOLEAP blocks. And so the teacher's thinking, I want to have flexibility and I want to have choice and I want to be able to use some or all of the components, and I want to be able to meet my students' needs, and I want to be able to see some challenging and complex resources. And so if you're really wanting more teacher input to modify to meet the needs of your students, then MOLEAP blocks are for you. Okay, so the MOLEAP blocks um, is a problem-solving application type of look. They're designed to be used flexibly by teachers. They're designed to supplement curriculum. We'll talk about that in just a bit. And I'm going to show you some samples of what some look like, and which you may have already seen. Um, all of our contents have used short, flexible, high quality, challenging, complex instructional materials and tasks. So the math tasks are complex, some of them, the science texts are complex, and the social studies and ELA materials and stimuli are definitely challenging and complex. Again, this is no cost to districts. And again, 100% created and developed by Missouri teachers, aligned to Missouri learning standards. Some of the item types are very innovative. The scoring guides are innovative. So we ask teachers to just kind of go out of the box. What actually are you doing in your classroom to help teach and assess this standard? And they did exactly what we asked them to do. They were terrific. They're unique to content. And so while the MOLEAP benchmarks look similar, there are some similar components to the MOLEAP blocks, but they're unique to content as well. So they're all going to look a little different according to that content. And again, the key here is to supplement that curriculum, and we want teacher flexibility. So maybe the teacher wants to use 2 of the pieces that she sees or he sees, and the other 3 or 4 pieces they're not going to use right now. Or maybe they want to use a piece of it, or maybe they want to use it in reading and then they want to assess it another time, or maybe they're just, it's really totally up to them. They're found on the DESE webpage. They are not through a vendor site. They're not scored by vendors. They're scored by Missouri educators that use them. So here's an opportunity for some collaborative, some individual scoring. You can sit down with your other teachers and score together collaboratively. You can score them by yourself. Scoring guides are provided along with these blocks. Here's an example. Lots of writing you're going to notice throughout the blocks in science and social studies, and then even in math where they're asked to do some work. But there's lots of opportunity where kids are doing the work and not choosing an answer. So the assessments, they look a little different than what the benchmarks are, which mirror more of the map. Again, some instructional uses, lots of connection, lots of cross content in the blocks. You can use them by themselves. You can use them to start off a unit. You can use them to end a unit. There are different standards that you'll find in science and ELA, and then ELA and social studies. They do a lot of cross content there. So just lots of opportunities. You can do them as a group. Kids can do them by themselves. You can do 2 or 3 kids and partner up. You can run through them as a class. Again, you can use pieces of them. Maybe there are a certain item type that your kids struggle with, that you found that out by doing the benchmark. And so the MOLEAP blocks you see had several items like that. So you're going to pull those out. Totally fine and up to you. Again, download them off of the DESE webpage, put them on your computer or Jump Drive or in a Google folder or whatever you want to do with them, and use them. Some things in common that you're going to find. First of all, we ask all of our writers to make them rigorous but grade appropriate. Okay, so you're going to find some materials higher than other materials. So some complex and some engaging text and task that follow that line of, wow, that was really tough, versus wow, this one was a little bit easier. Okay, and again, you can pick and choose that according to what works for your kids. All of them require student thinking. We want students on the MOLEAP blocks, we want the students on every piece, but especially at this point, we want opportunities to read, write, speak, and listen. You're going to find some of those in the blocks. Okay, and you're going to find where students are providing argument and evidence in almost every single block. Okay, we also have spent a lot of time talking about what are some big ideas, what are some areas that go across contents, and problems and phenomena is one of those things. There's always something to solve in all of them as well. All right, so with that said, you can see that in almost all of, or actually all of, not some and some all of, but all of the blocks are aligned to Missouri Learning Standards. You're not going to find that in a lot of other things that districts purchase that's 100% aligned, but these are and created by your colleagues. The opportunities for integration, lots of students tasked with instructions and reflection opportunities. There's always a teacher's guide to help you understand why something is written the way it was, or why it was there and what to do with that piece. Scoring rubrics are always there to help you score, since these are not scored by vendors or scored by you. We are working on adding that student sample responses when teachers start to use these, when we'll have some of those. Right now we don't. All right, and again, we will provide some of this as we go through and get those pieces. So looking really quickly at, you'll find in the ELA and in social studies, especially, a group of sources. So this is almost like a text set, right, around a group of a topic or an idea. You're also going to find that in ELA, we have constructed response where we don't, so that's a little bit different. Social studies has a lot of constructed response. Science has a lot of constructed response short answers, and so that writing component I talked to you about before. You're also going to find a scoring guide, and here's an example of some ways to score, and that you can sit down with your educators or with your coach and talk about what that looks like. And this one, actually, this block is a high school block. And this person that wrote this, or the pair, there's two of them, listed many instructional strategies. And so you're going to find that a little bit different with this in the teacher notes area than you will with the benchmarks, which doesn't have a teacher note section. But there are some examples of how to teach that. So we're starting to look a little bit into the curriculum piece of, here's some suggestions of what you can do with this block. Okay. And again, some innovative item types to score. This actually comes from Missouri Writing Projects Network as just an example of one thing they use to help with scoring. Here's a science ELA example of the integration. So this one has science standards listed, and then ELA standards listed for some integration example. And then here's an example of math. And maths are really unique, and I wish I would have thought about this before we did ours, but they have a lot of really like this column of look fors. So what does an approaching grade level student look like doing this task? And then what does an at or above student look like? What are some behaviors that you'll see? And I really like that. So those are some of the differences and some of the commonalities. And again, we could spend all day, but I just kind of wanted to give you just a real quick caveat of what we have. So back to what we were thinking. How am I going to use these? So the MOLEAP assessments are not in the picture anymore. They were a look back assessment to pinpoint the delay in instruction during that COVID time. The MOLEAP blocks, benchmarks, sorry, let's do the benchmarks first, provides indicators of student learning to date and show the progress on the current expectations. The MOLEAP blocks, therefore, are intended, sorry about that, to support teachers' flexibility with current curriculum that they already have in their districts around the Missouri Learning Standards. So I'm going to leave this page up for just a second and see if we have any questions before we wrap this up.
Yeah, so please feel free to unmute. While people are unmuting, Debbie, I have a question for you. So first of all, thank you. Light bulbs on, major clarification. So good. I love it. And I think I just want to thank, the department for getting this work together, because it's a huge, valuable resource to districts.
Thank you.
One question I did have with the MOLEAP benchmarks. These could be very valuable, especially with school districts who are already purchasing products to do this yearly diagnostic? Because in my mind, and people on the call counter back if you see something different, but I think if I were in a district working, I might want to do at least a mid or a post. This could be a really good indicator for me of how my kids might be scoring on the map, because I love the alignment to clarity and rigor. In order to get those reports, do they have to give them within that window that I had seen one point? I know that they could be used at any point, but I wanted you to speak to, is there a certain period they'd have to give them to get those reports?
Okay, great. And so, yes, I mean, we'll have them open from, well, this year they were open from fall, and they closed in December. And then we had a lot of districts reach out and say, hey, we need them in January. So then we reopened them in January, the end of December, then to about the end of January. So next year, I don't know what what that timeline will be. But yes, if you wanted, yeah, I mean, again, if you wanted those reports back, and also you need to think about when your district test coordinator, and Cheryl, you might be able to jump in on this, but your district test coordinator, when they set that window, your scores will come after that window closes. Yeah, so is that right? So some of you that are, okay. Yeah, so a lot of times I'll get calls from teachers that says, okay, my last student just finished in my classroom. How come I'm not getting my scores? But if the school district made the window for a month, and this is like in the middle of the month, it depends on what your window is for your district test coordinator. Am I right on that, Cheryl?
Yeah, that's
Okay.
right.
Yeah, so that's the only thing that I see. So I would suggest it. Yeah, I would suggest that the district test coordinator make the windows a little bit shorter. So that way, if you give it day one of the window, you're not waiting 30 days or however long they set that up to get that back.
But they have local control over those windows, and
Yeah.
throughout, whenever they get them, they should. Because I feel like this is a huge piece for people who might be spending a lot of money on those diagnostic screeners. I mean, if I were you, I'd let go of that and be trying to utilize these. Because I know at one point I was at a conference where Sean was at, and then he threw a wrench in this and said, oh, if we have funding to get the scoring. So do we? So I'm telling him for my trepidation, because I hate to say let go of it and then next year we
Yeah,
can score.
yeah.
So do we
I
think
hope
that's
so.
a possibility?
I mean, I hope so. Let's see. So I looked at the scores. So so right now, I was really specifically looking at the writing prompt, and I have those scores. I didn't put that in the PowerPoint, but I do have those scores. And so there was about 1,500 students per grade that took the writing prompt, that had the vendor score the writing prompt for them. That's not a lot considering how many kids we have, but it was enough for us to to look at a little bit of data. So that doesn't mean that they didn't take the benchmark and not take the writing prompt, which they could have if they wanted to. Take the first part, not take the writing prompt, or just take the writing prompt and not take for. So there were lots of, they could have done that. So we didn't have a lot take the writing prompt, like at only 1,500 per grade level, but so yeah, absolutely, I suggest that they try to take it if they can. The vendor scored it for free, gave a report back. I mean, you could match score it yourself and then match to see. There were so many opportunities there to see, what the vendor said that the student scored versus what you said, and what does that look like, and so forth. So do I think it's going to be funded next year? I honestly do. I don't know if it'll be all year long, like this year it was from September to end up being into January, or if it's just going to be a 3-month period or shorter period. I don't know, but I think I think it will be funded sometime in the year next year.
Okay, so you could maybe at least get one good touch point from it.
I mean, I think it's even worthy to, like I said, especially, and and one thing we did on the benchmarks that's a little confusing, but I like the confusion because in this case, because it's a good confusion, is we added a writing prompt to every grade level. So I had a lot of people calling saying, what are we? I hear, is 5th grade having a writing prompt this year? Is 3rd grade having a writing prompt on the map test? No, it's still 4 and 8. But we wanted opportunities for schools that are always asking me, well, what does a 3rd grade writing look like?
Yes.
What does the 8th grade or 7th grade writing look like? And we had the prompts, and so we we used them. So that was kind of nice, and a lot, several schools took advantage of that, of having that opportunity to have their kids score that was out of that scoring map of 4 and 8.
And you guys are speaking to a question I have, Debbie, and just want to echo, just say thank you to you. I know Shauna already said that, but this was very helpful.
Good.
So thank you for your time. But in regards to the benchmarks, it sounds like local control, but how many times could a district give it if they wanted to?
So the recommendation is once, but that's the recommendation. That's not that's not a rule.
Right.
It's going to be the same. It'll be the same items. So
Oh, got it. Okay.
because it's yeah. So again, I taught third grade for about 17 years before I went into title and other things, and I don't know how third graders have changed since then and now. But if I gave the third graders something in October and I gave it to them again in January, they wouldn't remember it was the same item.
Yeah.
No, they wouldn't.
Other grades may, yeah, but it would be the same item, so it'd be exactly the same thing.
Okay.
And then you kind of have to risk that. Do they really do? I mean, there's no way they can remember that, but maybe they do. Maybe I'm wrong and things are different now. But
Right.
yeah.
Yes, ma'am.
So it would be the same.
Thank
Just
you.
a question along those lines is once the teachers give those tests and they reflect on that, or they want to instruct their students, are they allowed to use the same question, or they have to make a similar question to address the mistakes?
So what you will get back and report would be a report on the standard. You're not going to see the question. So reports you'll get back would be, okay, the standard 3R3BC, or maybe not even C, 3R3B. I think it does go all the way to C. The student did not master that. So you would have to almost create your own question then to look at that, because you're not going to be able to see the question that on the. So those are still secure, but you do get student level report.
Okay, thank you. And another question is, I saw in your presentation the word rigor.
Yep.
And teachers were writing, they were keeping that rigor in mind. What's the understanding behind that word rigor?
So what we're wanting, there's been lots of research from the company called the TNTP, which is the New Teacher Project, as well as the Opportunity Myth document that they created, and some other documents since then. And Student Achievement Partners is another company that's done a lot of research, amongst other folks, about the difference between student remediation and student acceleration. So they're saying, what do we do when the kids come to school in the fall? Do we take 2 months of the year and do we go back and pick up the two or 3 months that they may have lost during that time, and the summer slide, and they're already 5 or 6 months behind, and do we take half of 8th grade to catch them up? Or do we start with our grade level assessments and grade level standards and move forward? And do we want to promote student acceleration, or do we want to go back? And so a lot of them are saying that students make more gains when they start with grade level standards. They start to teach those standards, and they realize when they see a hole that there's a huge missing piece in the middle of that unit or whatever that they're studying. They'll pick that up and they'll teach that skill, and then they'll continue to move kids forward. And so with that, and they also suggested that if students are not doing rigorous work with high quality, challenging, and complex text, that students, the motivation isn't there as high as what our students, if you're giving, and again, I think of back things that I did back in the 80s that now I'm totally embarrassed by, and keeping kids in reading groups because they didn't meet a certain percent of a running record, or those, or whatever it may be, and not taking that student choice and student motivation into account as much as I would now. And so that's kind of what some of that research talks about. It's this if you're interested, I could send Shauna a list of several documents to look at. But it's really interesting research about the use of those types of materials and tasks and the motivation of students and the achievement that they therefore produce.
Thank you for the answers. Hogan is shifting big time in planning piece with the teachers about having the rigorous
Mhm.
task and all. But this word has been so used by differently by different authors that it has created more chaos. But
Oh,
understanding like teach like champion rigor means different. Then you go to Mars,
yeah.
rigor means alignment of cognitive levels. So I was trying to
Mm.
make the sense when you are using the word rigor, is it the standard cognitive level making rigor, or it is the complexity of the task which is making rigors, because we want to convey the same thing to the teacher.
Mhm.
Probably.
Yeah, so I was trained by Dr. Webb where, you assign the DOK of, and I understand all of that, but bottom line is if you have a skill and and can do that skill, you should be able to do that skill on a variety of different levels as well as different contents across. So with that in mind, that means that um, this student should be able to be able to read this text and be able to therefore still analyze and break down that task, that complexity of task, even with the rigorous task that's presented in front of them. So yes, I understand a lot of it is about the complexity of the standard, but I still am 100% as a teacher know that they could still master a standard in isolation, but until they're in a rigorous situation that the task it promotes of multi levels of sorting of through, or whatever it may be, whatever the complexity of that task is, that skill, if it's not strong and embedded in some content, it's not going to stick. So that's how I view it as a rigor.
Thank you so much. That
You're
helps.
welcome. Okay.
One thing that I'd like to point out with the blocks for people on the call who are on or may not be on it yet, but I feel like right before the pandemic hit, you had been doing some meetings on just the importance of social studies and science and how
Yeah.
we need to make sure that we're bringing those back in. So I love that within the leaps and the blocks, there's this integration and helping show people, especially elementary, the concern is, oh my goodness, how do I fit it in? And so if we could integrate those within the core. And so I love with your blocks that if you were a district who didn't have that curriculum in place, this could be a
Mhm.
starting point for you
Mhm.
to look at those blocks. And as you mentioned on the call, maybe I teach 2 or 3 of the sources. I might even use one of those for my assessment. But rather than having to go out and buy things, people could be anchoring themselves as a start, because it's going to be a starting point for most people
Right.
to enter that back in. But any other thoughts on the call with the blocks and use?
Okay.
Anyone?
So I'll jump in for a quick. I worked with the school district, and the one thing that they did with the blocks was they took those blocks and they aligned them to some of the units that they had started with a series, with a textbook or some sort of an older series that they had, and they were trying not to purchase a new series in social studies. Is what this was for like grades 4, 5, and 6, and so I sent them that direction to let them look at the resources. And ELA doesn't have the background of sources. We were still, pretty heavily working on assessments at the time, where social studies had a couple years ahead of us. And I bet she has 60 to 70 different blocks in different grade levels on the social studies piece. And so there was so much to choose that when the school finished, they only had to create something, some sort of a curriculum to use with just a few standards. And they didn't take the blocks just as is. They made some adjustments. They added some of their own assessments that they felt like they needed to. They added a couple other source pieces that they used and had liked. And so, it's not starting over, which is why I tell people don't start over. Think about what you have, take a look at the blocks, and kind of do a little bit of a crosswalk and mesh them together. And if there's something that's coming out with the same results at the end, which one do you want? Which one do you think is a better way to go for what you want to teach at the standards, and manipulate it in? So it's going to take some work and some time, but you're right, Shauna. I mean, exactly. These are not meant to be curriculum, because they're not, but they're a great way to start, and they're a great resource to have. And and I think, again, I can't say this enough, Missouri educators wrote these. So this is not from a shelf product. This is not Desi Fifth Floor writing these on the weekends. I mean, these are coming from, from your colleagues that know how to teach that grade level and that content, and way better than we do. So, I mean, I can't say that they've been any better than what they are, just because of that.
Yeah, that was one of the highlights I heard. I thought that was pretty amazing that it was created by teachers, Missouri teachers at that. A couple of points. As you were talking, I got this picture of like a library with multiple uses where you could kind of supplement. But I wonder, and I am wondering, is it, how did teachers select what standards to pick to align those assessments to? I'm just trying to figure out, like, is it aligned to priority standards or just teachers' discretion?
Yes, that's a great question. So when we started this work, we were still in the early stages of priority standards, and so right now there isn't an alignment. There definitely will be an alignment down the road, but not at this time. And since all standards of the Missouri Learning Standards should be taught, and could be assessed, we didn't go through that idea of we're going to choose some of these, just a few of these. And so what we asked educators to do is we gave them some sources, and we gave them some ideas of some standards that could align, but we gave them the flexibility. You read this, what are some other standards that you think would align more appropriately, or you want to add additional alignment to. And so we really tried not to do that item writing, which is where we do give them um, an assessment, or we do give them a stimuli, and then we do hand them a list of resources to write, or standards to write to. We tried to kind of get away with that a little, get off of that. And so we really wanted to see, what do they normally do when they're in the classroom and they have this random rogue standard that they don't really care for, and then they can't figure out where to put it in. And so what are you going to do with it? And so maybe they decided to pull that one in. I mean, so we just really kind of left it up in arms and told them, here are some sources, here's an idea, here's a theme. If you have another source you want to add, let's look at it. Several of our educators added a couple extra sources of ones that they had used in the past, and as long as we got permission to use that, we used that. And that happened a lot at the high school level. They had their idea, but then they started with some of the sources we gave them, and they totally said, nope, we're pulling these in instead. And so we did. So we really wanted it to be completely, as much as we could, teacher driven. So some standards were assigned, and several of them were manipulated and changed. And so I don't know if that kind of answer your question, kind of doesn't answer your question, but
No, it did. Thank you so much.
And we didn't want anything to be forced. So we're not going to force a standard if it doesn't make any sense to teach it with that stimuli or that. So that was important to say for them as well.
And one point I will point out from the reviewing that I've done of the blocks that I like, because not only were they created by Missouri educators, but at most points, the assessment items match the format in which that students will see. And I found, working with districts, there's usually two things. Either the rigor is not there on your assessment, or if you don't have the different types of formatted questions, because format can really throw students off. So I appreciate that about the LEAPs, that you've included the writing prompts. It includes multiple sources. They're very map-like. So if anything, I feel like teachers could use those as a springboard to really see what might be the types of questions I need to ask to really help prepare my students to take that state assessment at the end. Right. Are there any questions? I know we're going a bit over, but I want to make sure I honor all questions from everyone on the call. Any other questions from the group?
I just wanted to clarify, if we took the benchmark, because we do have an outside source that we use for our benchmarking, but we don't have writing that's included. So we can just do the writing part.
Yep,
That's
sure can.
awesome.
That is really neat.
Is there any plans for the lower grades?
Oh, that's an excellent
We
question,
did, and they
Cheryl.
want more.
We get that a lot. If the money is there next year, yes. We don't want to take anything away from what we have. And so if the, we'll definitely try to finance what's there. But if there's any extra money, we are definitely going to start with second grade and work our way down in ELA anyway. So,
That's
Great.
yeah.
That's great, because I think a lot of times those K2 teachers don't get to that rigor and they don't think about it like this, and they think it
I
more in
agree.
isolation. So
Yeah.
count me in if you need help.
I always do. I'm surprised you're not totally running the other direction anytime we call you. We call on her all the time.
No.
Yeah.
And I was a part of all the social studies,
I know you
MOLEAPs,
were.
a lot of it. So we did the exact same thing. We started with social studies and then looked at it through a lens of a ELA person too. So we tied a lot of that in there.
There's just been so much work in the MOLEAP blocks, and they're just such a diamond, and that I just, every chance I get, I talk about them. And the MOLEAP benchmarks, I mean, they're perfect for, a good, hey, I need a quick check to see how my kids are going to do. They're, map like, they're all of those things. And so as a classroom teacher, I'd use both. I mean, I really would use both. I would use the MOLE benchmarks myself. I would look at my scores. I would look at my data, my reports. I would change my instruction and all those things to help my students. I would spend some time with the MOLE blocks with my colleagues and really look at some collaborative scoring of what does this look like and what your kids do on, just lots of opportunities to take that and really, tweak up my curriculum to help. And I think you're right, Cheryl. I think, the rigor definitely are in the blocks, and looking at what you're doing in your common assessments, and do any of this mesh? That was probably the biggest thing that I found when I went into classrooms, was the fact that my kids do really well on main idea. Why am I failing main idea on the map test? I don't understand why my kids can't get that standard when I tell you, look at what I've done with them, and there's no comparison between the two of what actually you're doing with the students versus how they are assessed. And life is not about assessments. I get that. But I think life's about opportunities. And I think, if students can do something here and have the opportunity to show that, we want them to be able to have the opportunity to show what they know in other areas as well, not just in one category, because then they get into life situations and we know they know something, but they can't show us that they know it. So I think that's our responsibility, is to be able to give that opportunity for them to show it in different ways.
Exactly.
And I want to go back to the classroom now, so. Anybody hire me?
Any more questions from the group? Well, I'd like to close, Debbie. It was a perfect segue. I had recently, I have a thing with Bob Marzano. I mean, I just think he's amazing. And, one of the things that's going to be on everybody's mind, and it always is how do we get a guaranteed and viable curriculum? And so, Bob, I'm going to act like we're friends. I've met him once, so I'm going to pretend it. But he says a guaranteed curriculum, the guaranteed part is that all kids have the opportunity to learn. And so I just wanted to close on that point, that comes back to our rigor and clarity, that the whole reason we have standards is because that is our guarantee to Missouri students, that we're going to guarantee that we're giving them that opportunity. So it is critical that districts are continually looking at their curriculum and assessment to say, am I giving my students the opportunity to learn at the rigor and the clarity at which those standards were written? And not intentionally, but a lot of times our kids aren't getting that opportunity. And two, is it viable? And Bob would say the viable part is, are you making sure you pace that throughout? And so as the priority standards come, a recommendation to the other people on the call too is that we're looking, not only do we have these items, but are we pacing it in a way that's realistic? And are we using these fabulous resources from the state to help make sure that we've aligned them so all kids can get that opportunity? So thank you so much for being on the call today. And then I'm going to go